My heels clicked against the marble of the lobby, each sharp tap echoing the restless beat in my chest. It wasn't even noon, and already the city outside shimmered like a mirage, sunlight bouncing off glass towers, the hum of traffic like a low, unending sigh. I left my office early, the excuse of a migraine rolling too easily off my tongue. Truth? Something in the pit of my stomach had tugged me homeward. When I slid my key into the lock of my apartment door, the quiet hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint and someone else's coffee. But inside wasn't quiet at all. Boxes. Everywhere. My mother's voice, low and cheerful, floated from the bedroom. This will make it so much easier for her when she moves into the studio. We're just helping her along. I froze. My grip tightened around the brass key until its edge bit my palm. There they were, my parents methodically folding my life into cardboard. My favorite linen dresses, stacked like old newspapers. My framed diploma tucked beneath a roll of packing tape. A slow burn crept up my neck. I cleared my throat. They startled, my father dropping a stack of books. "Charlotte, honey," my mother said, startled but smiling as if I'd caught her wrapping a surprise gift. "You're home early. We thought we'd help you transition. That tiny studio downtown will be so cozy." My heart hammered. Tiny studio? Transition? This wasn't help. This was eviction, dressed in parental concern. I can still smell the faint trace of lemon polish from that day, the way it clung to the banister I gripped as if the railing could hold me steady. I was 22, home for spring break, and already dreading every second. My parents' voices floated up from the kitchen, low, urgent, a storm brewing beneath the clatter of dishes. "Claire," my mother finally called, her tone sugar-sweet and razor-sharp. "Could you come down for a moment?" I remember smoothing the wrinkles in my thrift store skirt with trembling palms before stepping into the bright kitchen. Dad stood with his arms crossed, a stance I'd learned meant the verdict was already in. "We've been talking," he said, eyes fixed somewhere just over my head. "It's time you considered a more practical path." I swallowed hard. "You mean quit my art program?" Mom's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Honey, you're talented, sure. But talent doesn't pay rent. We found a listing for a studio apartment near campus. Tiny, affordable. We can help you pack this weekend." It felt like a punch. My paint-stained sketchbook lay open on the counter, pages of the life I dreamed of. They hadn't even asked. I heard my own voice shake. "So you're what, moving me out? Deciding for me?" Dad exhaled. Weary. "It's for your own good. Better to downsize now than struggle later." Every word sliced deeper. I wanted to scream, to tell them I'd been working 2 part-time jobs, saving every penny for my senior exhibit. Instead, my throat tightened until it hurt to breathe. From the living room, a familiar soft chuckle broke the tension. Aunt Margaret, Mom's older sister, stepped in, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. She'd always been my quiet ally, the one who slipped me sketchbooks at Christmas and whispered, "Never dim your colors for anyone." Margaret laid a hand on my shoulder. "Maybe Claire needs to decide for herself," she said, her voice calm but carrying steel. My mother frowned but said nothing. Margaret pressed something into my palm, a small brass key on a faded ribbon. "My old studio downtown. It's yours if you want a place that's truly your own." I closed my fingers around the key, its cool edges biting my skin, an anchor in a room that suddenly felt like it was tilting. That night, I packed not because they told me to, but because I refused to let them write my story. The key rested against my heart as I zipped the last bag. I still remember the first night in my own apartment, the tiny 2-bedroom I could barely afford on the west side of Portland. The walls were scuffed from the last tenant, and the carpet smelled faintly of old rain, but when I turned the key and shut the door behind me, the silence was electric. No one shouting, no one doubting, just me and the thin hum of the refrigerator. I made a vow that night. No one would ever again decide the size of my life. It started with the only thing I had in abundance: drive. I worked mornings at a cafe, my palms always scented with espresso grounds, and nights as a receptionist at a small architectural firm. Somewhere between those two jobs, I found time to learn. Free webinars, online certifications, stacks of secondhand books from the Goodwill down the street. Anything that could feed the faint but stubborn spark I carried. My break came unexpectedly. One slow evening, while I answered phones and filed blueprints, a senior architect named Dana Whitmore paused by the desk. She was tall and soft-spoken, with silver streaks in her dark hair and an easy confidence that turned every head. She asked why I always had a notebook full of sketches beside the phone. I nearly hid it, embarrassed. But she smiled and said, "Show me." Those 5 minutes changed everything. Dana saw something in my tentative pencil lines, something I didn't yet believe about myself. The next week, she offered to mentor me. Under her wing, my nights transformed. I stayed late, learning design software until the glow of my monitor was the only light in the office. Dana pushed me to enter small competitions. I lost the first 3, but the fourth, a design for a community art center, earned an honorable mention and a check big enough to cover a month's rent. Each small win stitched a little more confidence into my bones. The following year, Dana introduced me to a developer seeking a fresh, young perspective. I poured everything I had into that project, a boutique riverside cafe with warm wood and wide windows. When it opened, people lingered for hours, and the local paper called it an embrace in the shape of a building. The developer handed me my first real paycheck with a grin. From there, the projects multiplied. I registered my own design studio, Westbrook and Company, using the name of the street where I'd first sketched late into the night. I told almost no one, especially not my parents. Online, I kept my updates sparse. The occasional photo of a sunset, never the glossy magazine spreads or the signed contracts. Keeping it quiet wasn't about revenge. It was about peace. I wanted to build without the weight of their skepticism. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted them to discover the truth on their own, one day when they least expected it. And that day was coming faster than any of us knew. I stood at the top of the stairwell, one hand resting on the smooth walnut banister, the other clutching the small silver locket that had become my silent talisman. Through the wide French doors, late afternoon light spilled into my loft's open living room, glinting off the polished concrete floors. The skyline of Chicago stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, each glass tower glowing like an ember as the sun eased westward. Below me, my parents stood frozen. My mother's eyes darted from the grand piano to the abstract oil painting, one I'd bought from a young artist I'd met in Paris. My father's gaze landed on the custom oak bookshelves that spanned the far wall, heavy with design awards and leather-bound volumes. His jaw tightened, the way it always had when confronted with something he couldn't immediately categorize. I descended slowly, each step deliberate. The click of my heels echoed against the high ceiling like a metronome marking the beats of their silence. "Is all of this yours?" My mother finally whispered, her voice trembling like the edge of a paper cut. "Yes," I said softly, letting the words settle like dust in the golden light. Her fingers worried the strap of her purse. "But the last we heard, you were still struggling. You barely mentioned work." "That was the point," I replied. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I learned to keep my victories quiet, especially from people who thought I couldn't win. My father's brow furrowed. "Natalie, we were trying to help you. We only wanted you to move into the studio, so you'd be manageable." I finished for him. "So, you could check in whenever you pleased? So, I wouldn't risk disappointing you by succeeding on my own terms." He opened his mouth, but no defense came. The silence stretched until it became a presence of its own. I crossed to the sleek glass table at the center of the room and set the silver locket down, its tiny hinge gleaming. "I built my own interior design firm from scratch," I said, sliding a leather portfolio toward them. "These are the contracts. High-rise developments, luxury hotels, private residences across 3 states. And next month, my team is expanding to New York." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father leaned in, scanning the crisp pages like he could will them to reveal a trick. "I own this loft outright," I continued, my tone still even. "No loans. No silent partner. Just me, after years of 12-hour days and more coffee than anyone should drink. Their disbelief rippled through the room. My father finally sank onto the white sofa, his shoulders sagging as though someone had quietly removed the scaffolding of his pride. All this time, my mother murmured, eyes glossy. "You never said, because you never asked without already assuming the answer," I said gently. "You assumed I'd fall apart, that I'd need you to pack my things, to decide my next move." For the first time in years, my father looked directly at me, not at the diploma on the wall, not at the success scattered like confetti around the room, but at me. "Natalie," he said, his voice rough, "I misjudged you." I let the words linger, not as a triumph, but as a quiet reckoning. "This is who I am now," I said, my gaze steady. "I don't need saving. I never did." The city lights flickered to life outside, each one a tiny affirmation. In the reflection of the glass, I caught my parents' faces, stunned, yes, but softened too, as though seeing me, truly seeing me, for the very first time. I let the silence stretch. The clock above the fireplace ticked once, twice, each click a reminder of how long I had waited for this moment. My parents sat stiffly on the white leather couch that had cost more than their first car, their eyes darting across my loft like they were searching for proof this wasn't real. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother finally whispered. Her voice trembled, not from anger, but from something like shame. I folded my arms across my silk blouse, feeling the soft fabric slide beneath my palms. "Because every time I shared my dreams, you told me they were impossible, that I was reckless, that I'd never make it without you." I glanced toward the floor-to-ceiling windows where the Manhattan skyline glittered like a crown. "So, I stopped sharing. And I started building." My father shifted, his usual thunder gone. He looked older, smaller. We thought we were protecting you." I inhaled slowly, steadying the tight coil in my chest. "Maybe you believed that. But the night I came home early and found you packing up my things, deciding, without me, that I'd be moving into a tiny studio you picked out, it wasn't protection. It was control." They both lowered their eyes. I walked to the glass coffee table and set down 2 crisp folders I had prepared days ago. Their names were written in my neat handwriting. "Here's what I'm willing to do," I said, my voice even. My mother touched the folder like it might bite. "For you, Mom," I continued, "I'll pay off the remainder of your mortgage. But you will finally open that bakery you've talked about since I was little. No more excuses. If you accept my help, you have to promise you'll build something that's yours, not just take care of everyone else." Her head snapped up, tears shimmering. "And Dad," I turned toward him, "I'll fund the community workshop you've always wanted, the one for teaching kids carpentry. But only if you agree to stop pretending your own dreams died just because mine survived." My father blinked hard, swallowing whatever protest had risen. "These aren't gifts," I said gently. "They're opportunities. Conditions. Because if I learned anything, it's that independence is earned. I had to fight for mine. And I won't hand you something you're not willing to fight for yourselves." The room hushed. Only the low hum of the city filled the air, a soft reminder that life kept moving whether we chose to grow or not. My mother finally exhaled, a sound like surrender. I want that bakery," she said, voice breaking into a small, almost childlike smile. My father gave a slow nod. "And I'll build that workshop. I promise." For the first time in years, I felt the tension between us shift, like a door had cracked open. Not for them to step back into my life as before, but for all of us to step into something new. I reached for my wine glass, the crystal cool against my fingers. "Then we have a deal," I said. Outside, the lights of the city flared brighter, as if the skyline itself approved. The late afternoon sun spilled across my living room, turning the cream walls into shades of soft amber. I stood by the window, watching the city breathe, cars threading between traffic lights, people hurrying home with coffee cups and paper bags. Somewhere below, life kept moving, indifferent to the storm that had just passed inside these walls. Behind me, my parents sat on the sofa, quieter than I'd ever known them. My mother's hands, usually in constant motion, rested still on her lap. My father, who'd always spoken with a certainty that could fill a room, looked down at the pattern of the rug as if reading a secret written there. For the first time in years, I felt no need to fill the silence. It wasn't awkward. It was healing. They had finally listened, not just to my words, but to my life, the business I had built from scratch, the home I'd made on my own terms. They promised to start over, to treat my choices with respect, and to release the fear that had made them try to control everything. I believed them, not blindly, but because I could see it, the softening in their shoulders, the small tremor of humility in their eyes. When they rose to leave, my mother reached for me. Her embrace was hesitant at first, then steady and warm. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, her voice catching. I felt the weight of every year we'd lost in that single sentence. And just like that, the ache I'd carried since the day I left began to loosen. After the door closed, I walked to the bookshelf and picked up the small silver locket my grandmother had given me the night I left home. Its surface had dulled with time, but when I opened it, the tiny photo inside still gleamed, her smile as fierce and reassuring as I remembered. "Always choose the life that feels like yours," she told me. I traced the edge of the locket and smiled. I had chosen. And in choosing, I had found not just independence, but the kind of peace that doesn't beg for permission. The city lights flickered on, one by one, as evening settled. I closed the locket, set it back in its place, and whispered to the empty room, a promise, a prayer, and a victory all at once. "I'm home,"